For essentially as far back as I can remember, I've always had an interest in the post office and the ideas of mail and mail delivery. I don't really have an explanation for it. Maybe it was the running joke in my family in my early years that I was the UPS man's baby. Maybe it was the sitcoms I watched religiously, like Cheers and Seinfeld, with characters like Cliff and Newman respectively being favorites. Maybe it was because of the magazine subscription sales competitions we had in elementary school, which earned me prizes and my very own pieces of recurring mail in my own name. Most likely, it was all of the above, of course. Regardless of the reason, the mail and the USPS specifically has been a long-held interest of mine. I was particularly excited when my family moved to the ridiculously tiny town of Edison, Ohio, and we got our only P.O. box, and I got to go to the post office every day and retrieve our mail. My parents wouldn't normally waste money on such an extravagance as a P.O. box, but the town was so small, there wasn't even a mail carrier, so the only way to get mail was to have a P.O. box. In 7th grade, we had a required careers class, and one of the assignments it had was to shadow someone on their job for a day and write a report about it. Most kids did the obvious thing and shadowed a parent. I chose to spend my day with the Edison postmaster, and it was absolutely great. I got to see the behind-the-counter stuff. He explained the sorting method to me, and even let me put some of the mail in the P.O. boxes, and then when we were done for the day, he took me for ice cream. I genuinely hoped he would ask me to come back as an unofficial assistant or something, but that was my only day as a postal employee in Edison, Ohio. Over the 25 years since then, I've applied multiple times to similar jobs. I got as far as a virtual interview at FedEx and an in-person interview with UPS, but never got the gigs. And of course, I applied many times to the USPS itself in different cities and at different points in my adult life. For a very long time, I never got more than an email acknowledging my application. Eventually, I did start getting to the online test portion, but would dead end after that. The years continued to tick by until October of 2020. At the time of writing this, everybody is fully aware of the shit show that was 2020 in the first year of the pandemic. Presumably, we all still remember the turmoil taking place at the USPS with a certain president's appointed postmaster general and his attempt at dismantling the whole postal service, literally piece by piece. The controversies regarding the handling of mail-in voting ballots, and the pandemic's effect on staffing and related issues. What all of that added up to was a willingness to hire almost anyone who dared apply. A lowering of standards and sudden demand for more staff due to a catastrophe is usually how I managed to find myself employment. For example, I had applied at FYE several times over 8 years before finally getting an interview and hired, afterwards learning that the entire management team and staff had quit that week in order to go open a new competing store outside the mall. I ended up working there for 7 years, and any time a higher-up position was vacated suddenly, I worked my way into promotion until I was the senior assistant manager. Until October of 2020, that is. In October of 2020, one of my childhood dreams came true, and I was officially hired as a package sorter for the USPS at their Metroplex facility, which, if I recall my orientation video correctly, is one of the largest mail sorting hubs in the world. I stayed at FYE long enough to help them through Black Friday and started my training at the United States Postal Service the same week. The first week was very easy, as it was just employee onboarding, training videos, conference calls, and paperwork. We went out on the sorting floor for a brief tour and watched a safety video about the specific machines we would be operating, but that was it for training relating to the actual work. We were told the rest of that sort of stuff would be taught to us by our shift trainer. This was all taking place in a pre-vaccine world, so a lot of emphasis was placed on health safety. care was taken to stress to us that a lot of current employees were missing because of the virus spreading through the facility. This prompted one training classmate to ask if anyone had died while working there. She meant from COVID, but what we learned was that 2 people in the last month had died on the job just from non-COVID issues. I was fully prepared to take my job seriously, but certainly had not expected that degree of seriousness. This was a long way from ice cream lunches and P.O. boxes. After the week of classroom training, we were assigned our permanent shifts and were instructed to meet our on-the-floor trainer in the training room for our first shift. I showed up that night and met the trainer for the previous shift, which was ending, and was informed that my shift trainer had literally gone missing. She had apparently missed a previous shift, and nobody could reach her or knew of her whereabouts, including her own family. So I was told to just go out on the floor and somebody would come get me later. Nobody ever did, and nobody in charge on the floor knew what to do with me, so I was first sent to the package sorting machines, which was my official job duty anyway, and someone there began showing me some of the basic stuff. Less than an hour later, I was told they didn't need me there and was instead sent to the letter sorting machines. First to the machines which sorted the boxes of letters, and then was moved again to the big machines that did the real individual letter sorting. As far as jobs in the sorting department at a USPS facility go, sorting the boxes of letters is the easiest, most laid-back job. So much so that it goes long stretches without more than one person working both areas. It's a job mostly reserved for when you might have downtime during your real job. In some ways, one could argue it's a great primary task for someone who has had no training and is working their first shift. I worked that station for less than an hour that night. Second easiest, in my experience, was my official job of sorting packages. You work as 2 teams at those machines. One team is part of the actual sorting line, sitting at stations between conveyors and manually rotating the packages and placing them on the second conveyor line to be scanned and eventually spit into a giant box for a specific zip code. The other team works on the floor, keeping the giant boxes in place and rotated out when full of packages. My training that first night got as far as being shown how to assemble one of the giant boxes and place it properly under the conveyor chutes before being escorted to the letter sorting area. After being shuffled from station to station on my first shift, I ended up at the individual letter sorting machines. This was the most advanced of the sorting equipment and therefore the most intimidating. There are about 24 of these machines in this facility, and most of them were up and running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so staffing shortages affected this area greatly. Presumably, this is why a person with no training at all was taken over to one, assigned a partner who had roughly a week of experience, and was more or less left to figure it out. The gist of the machine is, on one end, a person takes the tubs of roughly sorted letters and feeds them into the machine while ensuring they all stay standing up and facing the correct direction. The machine very rapidly takes them into a system of rollers, belts, and sensors, photographs every single one, and sorts them into one of 300 plus potential slots. The second person's job is to watch those slots, ensure that nothing gets jammed, clear it if it does, and to empty each slot into a corresponding box when they're full, in addition to removing those boxes once they're full while still keeping everything in exact order. Laid out like that, it doesn't sound like too big a deal to work this machine, but what's hard to convey is the speed at which all of this is expected to operate. Hundreds of thousands of pieces of mail are going through these machines every hour, and their human operators have to keep up with them because there's no speed setting, and failure to do so at any stage while the machine is running can result in damage to the equipment. The biggest mistake I made that first night was not wearing gloves. Gloves aren't really necessary in the areas that deal with packages and boxes, but Letters are thin, and you're handling thousands very quickly. You might as well be juggling weighted razor blades with no training. Not only did I leave that first morning with sore and cramped hands, but there were significant cuts and gouges on my fingers and knuckles. I bought mechanic work gloves before my next shift, and I had holes worn through them before the end of the week. I spent about a week and a half working in the wrong department before somebody finally sorted it out and I began working in the package area. At some point, my supervisor was supposed to give me a time card so I could clock in and out on my own without signing in with a manager, but since I had been working in the wrong department, my time card got thrown away under the assumption I wasn't actually there. This becomes important later. Work in a mail sorting facility is very similar to work in a factory, or at least similar to the experience I had at the one factory I worked at briefly in 2003. What I mean here is that many tasks are traded among specific coworkers at set times in the shift. You work an hour here and then swap with someone in the other area for an hour and repeat. How that rotation works is something generally covered in training. A week and a half into working on the actual floor, and I still had never received any official training. I never even found out if that missing trainer was ever found. A week and a half into working on the actual floor, and I was finally working a full shift in my actual assigned department, but constantly asking everyone around what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. And every time I did, I was asked how long I had been working there and given a look like I should already know this stuff. Sometimes I would just be told to stand off to the side until somebody else could guide me in a task. There's nothing I hate more than the feeling of being in a situation where I know that I'm supposed to be contributing to the task at hand in some manner, but being completely helpless and figuring out how to do it correctly. And that's essentially how I felt almost all the time there. Management was rarely present, and supervisors were often also working the machines alongside the regular staff. So sorting out who I was even supposed to be getting training from was a clusterfuck unto itself. This left me relying on my low-level coworkers for instructions, and if you've ever had a job where you weren't in charge, then you know that means the only training I was getting was the improper shortcut version for each task. So, if you had a delayed or a damaged package or letter sometime in December 2020 with a Metroplex stamp on it, that could have been directly my fault. I'm sorry. I could go on at length about all of the problems that I saw around me, or I experienced, or about the time that I went off on two managers because a shift change happened and I didn't know it, and literally everyone had me backed into a corner asking me who I was, when I was supposed to leave, who my supervisor was, and where I was supposed to be stationed, but I had no answers for almost all of those questions because everybody kept assuming I already knew what I was doing and wouldn't tell me anything. This all came to a head on Christmas night. It was finally starting to feel like I was getting the hang of at least the bare minimums of the job. I could handle the different tasks around the package sorting machine with no direction and had started to get into the routines. Christmas night is a pretty chill night for package sorting, even though all of the sorting facilities had been backed up with delayed packages for months. We had actually gotten caught up and were processing stuff on time, which was nice, since no new packages were coming in because of the post offices being closed for the holiday. Things were going smoothly until the machines broke down. This wasn't uncommon, and usually we would all scramble to the second machine and get it up and running with little downtime. This night was different, though. The manager for our shift had taken the night off, and the supervisors had disappeared, leaving us all to sit around and wait for someone to tell us what to do. The man I had believed to be a supervisor eventually came around, and a guy near me asked him what the plan was for the rest of the shift. He said he had no idea and just go home if you want to. He wasn't speaking to me directly, but I was near the man who asked, so that's what I did. Since I still had no time card, I signed out on the slip the supervisor left out for us as a makeshift time clock, and I went home. I had worked more than the half the scheduled shift, and there was apparently no plan in place for additional tasks, so it made sense to me to do so. I'd even gone home early another time when a similar situation had arisen. What I failed to take into account was the part where those sign in and out slips didn't always make it to payroll. The week before, I had been pulled aside because payroll had no record of me working a couple of scheduled days, and I had to prove I had in fact been there. And so, on December 26th, I received 3 identical letters in the mail telling me that I was fired from my childhood dream job at the USPS. This was very much a shock to me. I was scheduled to have that day off, so I waited until my next scheduled shift and went to work anyway. My ID card still worked at the gate, so I thought maybe they had noticed the error in firing me and it was sorted out. Maybe the letters had been sent before I sorted out the payroll issue the week before. I reported to my work area and learned that, again, the manager was not there that night, so I couldn't even talk to her about the letters and try to figure this all out. Eventually, a manager from another department was called over and said he had no idea about any of this, but since I had the letters saying I was fired, he had to act on them and take my ID badge, and I should go home and call later to talk to my proper manager. At this point, I figured that would be a waste of time, so instead I called my union representative. He told me there wasn't anything they could do since I hadn't yet completed my 90-day minimum to be considered a full employee. And just like that, my time as a United States Postal employee was over. After decades of trying to get that job, I was in and out in just under a month. The most frustrating part of it all is that I still don't actually know why I was fired. The letters just had a vague reason cited about failure to maintain a regular schedule. But to my knowledge, I worked every shift I was scheduled. But, considering how mystifying and aggravating nearly every one of those shifts were, I suppose it's only appropriate that my time there should have ended equally mystifyingly and aggravatingly.